Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. The Taliban and the Afghan government, they are scheduled for a meeting on the 5th of January. That makes Monday. And on Monday, Taliban and the Afghan government would be discussing several points. Although the points of discussion are murky in a sense that the confidential points are with the Taliban and with the Afghan government. And there is also this understanding between the two parties that they would not disclose the exact points of discussion with the public. That is understandable. But at the same time, what is more important is the political stability of Afghanistan. And this is exactly what the Taliban and the Afghan government are going to meet and going to discuss on the 5th of January. They are primarily going to discuss about the future political scenario of Afghanistan. And when we talk about political scenario, this certainly means maybe a new political setup in Afghanistan. It would also include the understanding between the two parties on specific few ideas. For instance, ceasefire. Now, this too is a tricky point between the Taliban and the Afghan government. We have seen unprecedented violence in Afghanistan in the last few months of 2020. There were almost 429 killings of pro-government people just in September last year, and 212 civilians lost their lives in October. This is a big number, and as I said, this whole point of ceasefire is also a bit tricky in a sense that partial ceasefire or full ceasefire, we are going to discuss about this. But more importantly, the role of spoilers in Afghanistan, that is very important, not just for Afghanistan but for the region. Spoilers like ISIS, Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, Hezbollah and Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, these organizations have been operating over there in Afghanistan, using the Afghan soil to target people in Pakistan as well. ISIS has been operating freely in Afghanistan. We saw the way ISIS last year targeted innocent people in Afghanistan. They targeted a Sikh temple in Kabul. They attacked a maternity ward, for that matter, in Kabul, and this was devastating. The regional countries, and specifically the Afghan government, they have to find out a way to eliminate the terrorist organizations, spoilers like ISIS and TTP, Jamaat-ul-Ahrar and Hezbollah. And more so importantly, when we talk about spoilers, we also have to keep in mind the way and the role India has been playing in financing and supporting the terrorist organizations in Afghanistan. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and DG ISPR Major General Iftikhar Babar, a few weeks back, they came up with a damning presser in which they exactly mentioned the name of the Indian military officials and diplomats involved in supporting and financing terrorist organizations and terrorist individuals in Afghanistan to attack the Pakistani forces and the Pakistani people. So much so that that Indian dossier, as we call it, actually mentions and it showed the bank receipts, the transfer of funds from India to Afghanistan and to these terrorist organizations. So that was very important to know about Afghanistan and India's role of a spoiler in Afghanistan. We'll be discussing about Afghanistan's political future, terrorist organizations operating over there, and India's role of a spoiler with our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Brigadier retired Tipu Sultan, renowned analyst on Afghanistan affairs and expert on Pakistan's national security. Welcome to the show, Brigadier Sultan. Our second guest is Syed Muhammad Ali, renowned expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and regional politics. Welcome to the show, Syed Ali. Brigadier Sultan, starting with these the talks that are going to take place on 5th of January. Primarily, they are going to discuss about the Taliban and the Afghan government. They are going to discuss about the future of political scenario in Afghanistan. So far, things are tricky, as I just mentioned earlier. There is partial ceasefire, but there are attacks as well, sporadic attacks. There is violence all over Afghanistan, and Afghan government we also see is kind of weak at the moment. They don't have it of the state in many areas of Afghanistan. How do you see the political situation at the moment?
Well, Taimur, I'll tell you that the peace talks have prolonged for an awful lot of time. The Geneva Accord and the Peshawar Accord are fresh in our mind. When the Soviets attacked Afghanistan, the Geneva Accord was gave the provisions for the ex-Soviets to withdraw from Afghanistan, and the Peshawar Accord was supposed to bring peace to the Afghan warring factions, and we saw that the Peshawar Accord failed to do that. As they say, the peace looks good only when the negotiations are taking place and an accord is signed. And after that, what happens in Afghanistan is a thing to analyze and to imagine. I will tell you that the Afghanistan unfortunately has been at war with itself for power, for ethnicity, for faith, for those people who want to come to terms with the occupying forces. And these talks have, the longevity of these talks have affected the Taliban. I think one of the underlying factors that damaged the prospects of peace is that the prospects of peace is being diluted because of the length of the time, and the parties at the talks are more concerned of finding the weaknesses about the others rather than the strength and having a coalition government in Kabul. Zalmay Khalilzad with the new administration does not have that much of faith as he had with Trump. I think what he has done is that he on a number of occasions he gave a statement to involve the Indians in the talks. And Pakistan does not like it for obvious reasons, because the Indians have been damaging Pakistan. They continue to do that. And there are already reports that Ahsanullah, who is an American citizen, when Zalmay Khalilzad was an ambassador in Kabul, he gave him the contract for the cellular phones in Afghanistan, a lot of money, and through him he might be talking to Kandahari Taliban in Dubai. So, and the new U.S. administration has announced that they would like to change the chief diplomat, Zalmay Khalilzad. He may be there as a deputy, but then he will not enjoy that much of freedom that he had earlier. I think the common grounds that we are expecting between Ashraf Ghani, government in Kabul, and Taliban, all the other people, doesn't look synonymous to what the intentions are in Doha. On ground, what the reality is that whosoever comes in power, if the Taliban are there, they will have to fight Al Qaeda, they will have to fight ISIS, they will have to fight the TTP. And if the peace does not come and the war continues, it is going to affect all the regional countries, and Pakistan is as a prime country which will be affected. There is the terrorist attacks within Pakistan from across Afghanistan continue, because the Indians are not interested in peace in Afghanistan,
we'll talk about
because
that.
their shop will finish. And already you mentioned in your introductory talk that the Foreign Office and the ISPR gave the evidence towards that.
We'll talk about the Indian dossier, but before that, Syed Ali, talking about the future roadmap for the political settlement in Afghanistan, how do you see it? Because looking at the Kabul government, we see several internal divisions, the Abdullah camp, the Ashraf Ghani camp, and we also remember how controversial that president election was. They were, and at the same time there were two oath-taking ceremonies. These two gentlemen were, on different lines. How do you see the internal divisions of the Kabul government and the future roadmap?
Shamil, I think the political division within the setup in Kabul itself represents the nature of the system, that it is divided and it is polarized, it is insecure, and like Brigadier Sahab rightly pointed out, and I agree with him, that with each passing day, the US security commitment, the US morale, and the US interest in Afghanistan is declining. The public support within the US for continued military presence is also reducing. And with that, the confidence and the hope of Kabul administration to survive in the foreseeable future is also declining. These are the two sort of constant trends that I can anticipate during this year. Now, these two trends have a deep impact on these talks and the future of Afghanistan, because frankly, I think the Afghan Taliban have the time on their side, they have the geography on their side. Recently, their influence within Afghanistan has increased, and they are not in a hurry. So, in fact, regarding the lack of confidence in the Kabul administration is also manifested, because Ashraf Ghani Saab did not want these talks to be held in Doha. He wanted these talks to be held in Kabul. But the Afghan Taliban obviously did not agree to it.
He never wanted the talks with the Taliban in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely, because that would have represented a political recognition and would have given them legitimacy, which Afghan Taliban obviously do not want to offer at this point in time. And I think currently, according to recent estimates, around 2,500 American troops are still there, and but the spanner in this whole process is obviously the arrival of the Biden administration, whether they will continue the commitments that Trump administration made to the Afghan Taliban in the Doha agreement last year, or will they try to add some fresh conditions which might not be acceptable to the Afghan Taliban.
Right.
So that is a risk which has to be borne in mind. But the most important thing that I want to highlight for your viewers is that irrespective of who is in power in Kabul, irrespective of who is in power in Washington, Pakistan is the longest standing friend of the Afghan nation. We have always supported them politically, economically, socially, medically, at the humanitarian level as well. And we stand with the Afghan people, with the Afghan nation. And I think recently, I think our approach towards Afghanistan, the main contours of our Afghan policy are four-pronged basically. Politically, we are dealing with everybody in Afghanistan, all the stakeholders. Economically, we are signing agreements, and we expect the current Islamabad government aims to achieve a $5 billion target in the next 3 years and develop Afghanistan as the fourth biggest export market of Pakistan. Socially, we are very close and integrated. And in terms of military, I think the most important aspect is that Pakistan is warning the international community and all its friends and players about the destabilizing role that India is playing directly and indirectly through the Afghan soil to harm Pakistan and to destabilize the peace process. That is something which must be very important part of our foreign policy and international diplomacy.
Right. Brigadier Sultan, coming back to the question of the internal divisions in Afghanistan, and then we'll move on to other topics. President Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, the divisions that are internal in Afghanistan, what would be the impact of these politics on the upcoming, let's say, roadmap for Afghanistan, the political roadmap? Do you think that there would be maybe an interim setup in Afghanistan if these talks continue? Because Taliban might not agree to share power with President Ghani, or with the current setup. What would be the future scenario? How do you see it?
Well, Taliban have got different agenda compared to the Kabul government. The Kabul government is based on some kind of democracy, westernized democracy that has been injected over there by the European Union and the Americans. Taliban have got a very different setup, and Taliban will be mighty happy if Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani are at loggerheads. Don't forget that people across the Sailang Tunnel to Mazar-e-Sharif, to Targundi border and to Panjshir Valley, the Ahmad Masood, the son of Ahmad Shah Masood, who visited the United States and came back and unfortunately decided he chose to be at war rather than peace. So I think the factionalism in Afghanistan has not attenuated with the passage of time. As far as there was a comment made over here, you know, the top leadership of Taliban and the second tier leadership of the Taliban are worried because the people who are negotiating in Doha, like Mullah Brother,
Yes.
you know, they injected Mullah Hakim and they superimposed on him. There are also reports there is money involved, and the Kandahari Taliban have got money through
So different factions of Taliban.
through Dubai, and that is an Indian money through Ahsanullah. And Zalmi Khalilzad has been playing a dual role with the Indians and Pakistan and all that. So the Afghan talks do not look that innocent and simple as they appear to be on the media. It's not like that. The ceasefire that you mentioned earlier in your introductory talk is, I think, an year old, and Taliban do not agree. Taliban say that you give us the time schedule when you exit.
Withdraw.
It is for us to decide what sort of a government should
So
be
the tricky
there.
thing is that they said that they would have ceasefire. The tricky part is with the Americans, not with the
not
Kabul
with
government.
them. So what I will tell you is that Ashraf Ghani and his deputy Amrullah Saleh, who is a sworn enemy of Pakistan, as an Indian hand, everybody knows that. They want this influx and they want this impasse to continue for sinister reasons. And Pakistan, this government has recognized that, and this government has spoken more on the Indian threat emanating from Afghanistan, and they have held so many conferences on that. The Prime Minister has spoken to the international community, to the European Union, to the UNO, and in his virtual conferences and all that. So, what I will tell you is that.
So would US be concerned about, let's say, India's role over there? Do you think that while we have given this Indian dossier of India's involvement, would US address the issue of Indian involvement in Afghanistan if, let's say, we have taken up this issue on different platforms?
Frankly, Taimur, do not expect much from the United Nations or
US.
international community or OIC in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has got different interpretations also in the US State Department and in the US strategy. They may not be interested too much in Afghan peace, but at the back of their mind is what happens if they leave the region. You know, the area looked very lucrative
Right.
for ISIS, Al-Qaeda and Taliban and TTP and all that. But on the other hand, the US hawks also realized the geographical location and its proximity to Central Asia,
But that's
to Iran and to Pakistan.
But Afghan war has been very costly for the US. You know, hawks can say whatever they want to say, but it has been a very costly, longest American war.
The Americans are superpower because of their involvement, because of their gunboat diplomacy, because of their wars that they have been waging. It might be costly for them in dollar terms, but it might not be costly for them in strategic
But
terms.
this reminds me of Obama's words. He said that we have fought 2 or 3 wars on credit card. So Afghan war and the Syria war, Baghdad war, Iraq war were fought on credit card. So Afghanistan,
And
how
all
do you see
these
it?
wars, Taimur, were based on false narrative. It has
False
been
narrative,
proven.
right.
No weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They came into Afghanistan without proving that they were involved in 9/11. You name it.
This is interesting.
There are 3 things, my 3 comments on this is basically the Afghan war is the longest war, is also the costliest war, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of the political capital for the Americans. It is politically very costly within the US. That is why Trump wanted to pull back these troops and show that he has saved American lives and win some votes on that account. He did not succeed, obviously, but it is also a bipartisan view in Beltway that Afghan war is an unpopular war inside America. That is one thing. The second thing is strategically, allow me to say that if the US withdraws militarily, it has cultivated a lot of proxies there.
Right.
So it does not mean that US will withdraw its influence and its engagement, but boots on ground is another thing which is politically costly inside the US.
Right,
The second aspect is that the Afghan peace process is important for the Biden administration as well. So they need to come up with a fresh look at the Afghan policy. And I think it is very important for your viewers to know that the biggest spoiler of this US sponsored process is India. So US must understand that in the larger Asian landscape, although it expects India to emerge as a major strategic ally, but if the US wants peace to be achieved in Afghanistan prima facie, and wants a quick and timely exodus of its soldiers, then the main hurdle is the Indian role, which is continuing and promoting insecurity and instability in Afghanistan. The US administration of Biden, President Biden, must recognize that and influence India to and try to persuade Kabul to reduce the military and intelligence presence of India in its own interest.
So this is interesting. I'll discuss about this point specifically, that would US, it's been 19 years now, I mean it's a long time, and in this 19 years India has a lot of presence in Afghanistan in terms of spoiling the whole thing that Ali just talked about. We'll be discussing about this. India's role of a spoiler in Afghanistan, financing and supporting Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, TTP and Hizbul-Ahrar. These are the terrorist organizations who have been targeting Pakistan, and interestingly the supporters of ISIS, the attackers of ISIS who were killed in Afghanistan and caught in Afghanistan, they belong to India. They were Indian citizens. We'll be discussing about this after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing Afghanistan and the political situation in Afghanistan. Brigadier Sultan, talking about, as Ali just mentioned before the break, the India's role of a spoiler in Afghanistan and what US can do about it. The way we have brought up this dossier, Indian dossier, we have handed it over to the Secretary General of United Nations, so much so to the Afghan ambassador here in Islamabad. So this is something very important, and I would say the information was very important, very critical. The question is that while this all was happening, US has heavy military intelligence presence over there in Afghanistan. NATO has heavy military and intelligence presence over there. Afghanistan has presence over there. They didn't know that India was supporting these terrorist organizations, and now what can US do about it?
The thing is that the international diplomacy and strategy, the flow of events of the international establishment is not based on such like dossiers, and they don't change their strategy and policy on what Pakistan's press conferences say in Islamabad. It is a different equation. The Americans do understand that they cannot annoy, so to say, India, because they want to prepare them as a counterweight to China in the region. The Indians, on the other hand, understand from inside, intrinsically, their military and their thinkers, that gone are the days when they used to dream about defeating Pakistan. They cannot do it. Their strategists are already saying that in '98, when they blasted, when they went nuclear, and the nuclear weapons came out of the closet, it has not helped India as much as it helped Pakistan, because it restored the strategic balance over here. And then they went on to say that Balakot strike was also very naive, because it came out, the Pakistan Air Force came out so strong that they realized that they can do it, and this sort of offset the balance.
So the dossier point on Afghanistan.
What the inference I am trying to draw over here is that the Indians have realized long time back that Pakistan cannot be effectively defeated in conventional military mode, or should they go nuclear. So what are the other means available to the Indians to affect Pakistan? And Afghanistan is a tailor-made situation for them. They won't let it go.
Proxy.
And the American overall policy in the region, in the world, does not suit them to side with Pakistan as compared to the Indians as of now. So this is how it stands. There's something that the politics that runs across the cities of the United States or any other country, but there is something that the institutions of those countries think like Pentagon and CIA and the Department of Energy, which controls the nuclear weapons and policy and all that. Trump can play politics by saying that they are going to withdraw their forces.
Right.
And they can talk about against the ISIS, Al Qaeda and TTP and all that. But the situation in Syria will tell you the whole saga of Al Nusra and with the Alawite government in place in Damascus and the IS protection by Israelis and everything, that these organizations, the CIA, the intelligence agency, that we keep them on their side for their own purposes. So the Americans are not naive not to know what the Indians are doing. They will depend on our dossier. Indeed, they have got more information as compared to us. They know it. But their strategy, in their thinking, Pakistan has neither been able to convince them, nor has been able to force them on what the actual ground reality is and what they should be doing. Yes, our diplomatic offensive should continue. But I think Pakistan needs to base its strength on other things other than the dossiers also. And those other things are that we have to look at the Indian vulnerabilities also. We have to diplomatically go on the offensive, and we have to tell the Indians from inside that we know what is happening in Chhattisgarh, we know what is happening in Ulfa, we exactly know what is happening for Khalistan, we exactly know what is happening in Kashmir. So they have vulnerability. We always talk, oh, the Indians are affecting us from Afghanistan, but we never think that how can we do the quid pro quo against the Indians. So we are always blackmailed by the organizations like FATF, like the United Nations for that matter, or the European Union and whatnot. I'm not advocating that we should start a war, but there is a huge grey area between war and peace, let me tell you.
So
and
we
the
can
nations,
do more.
nations do exploit that huge grey area, and we have been sitting. Not only that, the previous governments of People's Party and PMLN did not have a viable foreign ministry, and people like Hussein Haqqani and others like him, like Najam Sethi, have been affected the strategy over here. Our own MNAs speak on the floors of National Assembly, which will help the Indians.
So there needs to
that
be more
kaap rahi thi and whatnot. It is shameful, I tell you.
Proactive approach.
From within we give support to such people, and we help that hybrid war that has been waged against Pakistan.
Ali, talking about, you just mentioned Joe Biden administration, certainly the next president in the White House. What do you think that they would continue with the strategy and the decision taken by the Trump administration? Although this is popular decision, by the way, and so much so that the American press has been covering it in a very positive way, that this decision was positive. If, let's say, US withdraws its troops from Afghanistan, that is also what the Taliban want. There would be peace and stability, and we may, head towards some peaceful solution. But what is your take on this? Do you think that Biden administration is going to keep some presence in Afghanistan? Because Antony Blinken, the nominee for the Secretary of State, he has mentioned repeatedly in his different interviews that they are going to keep some sort of US troops presence or maybe intelligence presence in Afghanistan. But Taliban have also made this clear that until the American troops completely withdraw from Afghanistan, there would be no, let's say, ceasefire or peace in Afghanistan.
Agreement in Doha.
So that's right. So tricky.
Basically,
how do you see it?
Basically, that is the most critical aspect of the Doha agreement, that the Afghan Taliban had committed to this agreement on the condition that by May this year, the US troops will leave. But if the Biden administration reviews this or delays this process and decides to continue some token military presence there, then I think this peace process can face serious difficulties. I think as a Pakistani expert, my assessment is that the things are not going to be sorted out, and Afghanistan is unlikely to become a very peaceful, stable country in the foreseeable future. But what we have done, our approach and our policy towards Afghanistan is comprehensive, mature and consistent. In the last 19 years, our narrative on Afghanistan, our stance on Afghanistan has been vindicated by the US recognizing and appreciating our diplomatic role in bringing all the stakeholders together. That is very important. And increasingly our soft power in Afghanistan is also increasing thanks to our diplomatic initiative and increasing economic activity.
Right.
So, Afghan nation and the Afghan people should also increasingly see Pakistan as a friend of the Afghani nation. That is very important, because that is the gap in which the Indians tried to play, because they attempted to present Pakistan in an unfavorable manner to the Afghani people. It is very important that we win the space in the psychological domain, in the public domain, in the economic domain, in the social domain within Afghanistan. Because like I earlier mentioned, Afghanistan is Pakistan's fourth biggest export market as well. Our lifestyle, our values, our history, our culture, our language has a lot in common. So that is why it is very important, and I think the strategic objective of New Delhi has been beyond the tactical and conventional and kinetic domain to basically harm this long-standing historic brotherly relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We have problems, but they should be surmounted through wisdom, through patience, through dialogue, through greater economic integration. That is very important. However, we must continue to emphasize that Afghan soil and territory should not be used to the detriment of Pakistan's national security interests, and that is something which we must warn the incoming Biden administration, that if the US wants peace and stability to return to Afghanistan, then the biggest spoiler in this whole peace process is New Delhi, and the improvement in peace and security in Afghanistan will heavily depend upon the US pressurizing New Delhi to reduce its military and intelligence presence in Afghanistan. If that happens, then I think all the other players, whether it's Afghan Taliban, whether the regional players like Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, they all will be able to contribute to this process. That is likely to take, as Brigadier Sahab rightly pointed out, its natural course. Unfortunately, the ideological and conflict between the Kabul administration and Afghan administration and the Afghan Taliban is significant, and it seems difficult that they will agree to the terms that are suitable, but there has to be an arrangement which is mutually acceptable to both parties, which is unfortunately not very likely.
Let's see in the future. My last question to both of you, Brigadier Sultan, first to you. Pakistan's approach towards Afghanistan. All these issues that we have discussed, Pakistan in last 2-3 years rather, has proactively been following up on its diplomacy with Afghanistan. Jinnah Hospital in Kabul, Pakistan funded that. Pakistan has also opened hospitals along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, because a large chunk of Afghans, they come to Pakistan. They are brothers. We welcome them. They come for better facilities to Pakistan. So opening hospitals along the border is very important. They can go over there. We have been giving scholarships to the Afghan students. This kind of diplomatic outreach, how important is that, when Ali just talked about people to people understanding and interaction?
Well, this is very important, because people have across the Durand line have suffered. But I will tell you again that there are a lot of claws in the pie, as they say. People, make inferences of the American wars and the Vietnam War and Afghan War, and that lasted for 12 years or so. This has lasted more. Don't forget that the Vietnamese had defeated the French in Dien Bien Phu, and all the Vietnamese are Vietnamese. There are no Uzbeks, there are no Tajiks, there are no Pashtuns, there are no Pancheris, there are no Heratis and all that. The Americans are there in Kabul because there is dissension within the Afghan society. There are push and pulls. Afghanistan is not being controlled by one nation as Vietnam was. And then people forget that there are a lot of things economically and strategically connected with Afghanistan. That is why the successive US administrations have not withdrawn fully from Afghanistan. If the Americans wanted peace and they wanted to withdraw, I think it has been the American strategy to prolong the talks and get the Taliban diluted in space and time. And the Taliban leadership is already worried that these people have got all those perks and privileges there, and their war machinery is suffering. These measures are important, but I think the Americans and the Indians and the Ashraf Ghani and co must realize that if the peace does not, everybody has a leverage. What Pakistan has a leverage, because Pakistan can affect the other country across the Durand line. Unfortunately, it should not be there. But why should these people be coming again and again to Pakistan, Zalmay Khalilzad and Mullah Brother and everybody and Ashraf Ghani, because we are Afghanistan's neighbor, we are most affected, they are affected. And if the peace does not come to Afghanistan, then Pakistan has to look for its options. What leverage does it have? How the TTP is going to affect us, how the ISIS is going to affect us in Al-Qaeda and all that.
Well, by the way, we have been fighting
if the Afghans have been at war for 2 decades, so has Pakistan been. Pakistan has had to clear North Waziristan, it had to clear South Waziristan, it has to clear Maiman, it has to clear Swat. No, all the areas below Chitral, right up to Koh Suleiman.
Ali, last question, we'll wind up the program. There's these 3-4 points. Pakistan's approach, as you rightly mentioned earlier, diplomatic approach, hospitals, scholarships and people-to-people interaction. How important is this, especially in the present scenario and in the future scenario?
Very quickly, I think Afghanistan is very important for Pakistan, and also in terms of the Indian strategy to diplomatically isolate, an attempt to economically strangulate, politically destabilize and strategically exhaust us. So Afghanistan is very important, because I agree with what Brigadier Saab said, that conventionally and strategically they can't invade us. So that is how they are trying to bleed us through Afghanistan. So no country will benefit more among the neighbors of Afghanistan than Pakistan in terms of security, economy, prosperity, CPEC, and all this. This region will benefit if Afghanistan is stabilized and secured. So I think the international community, whether it is the US, China, Russia, and all the friends, must recognize that if this region needs to be stabilized, secured and made a land of prosperity and opportunity, then Afghanistan is the linchpin. It needs to be secured, and the biggest spoiler is India.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
The last thing that I want to tell you is that Pakistan should start speaking the truth more. They should start speaking that here are the spoilers, this is why it is not succeeding.
So we have given the dossier, what else?
Dossier
that is in front of everybody, in front of the world.
It is just not one occasion, Timur. It is, Pakistan has just for last 3 months upgunned its narrative against India, what they are doing in the hybrid war against Pakistan.
Disinfo,
so,
EU disinfo and all that, the way they have been carrying out things.
Absolutely, it has to go with the same pitch. And we have to exploit the Indian vulnerabilities, the huge grey area that I indicated to you.
Right. Thank you for joining us.
That will tip the balance.
Thank you so much for joining us, Brigadier Sultan. Pleasure having on the program. Syed Muhammad Ali, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. That is all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.